Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Perfect RIA Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Jarvis. With me today, special guest, Lewis Schiff. Lewis, I saw speak at the Echelon Partners, probably, and Lewis, I don't want to just blow smoke your direction, one of the better keynotes I've ever seen, because it was both this combination of like real world application, but then also the data. Like you've got a good blend between the two. So really excited to have you on the show today.
Thanks, Matthew. I really appreciate it.
So now tell us, just for our listeners who aren't familiar, who haven't read your books, Business Brilliance, Middle-Class Millionaire, some of your other works, tell us just a little bit about yourself, and then we're going to jump right into how do people leave the middle class, whether it's as a financial advisor or in general, and get to this next level.
Yep. I grew up in New York City, where I am right now. I grew up in what I would call decidedly middle-class circumstances. I went to New York City public schools all the way through college. My father worked for the city of New York. Wow. My mother was a local real estate agent. So we were a really healthy middle-class family. I wouldn't have called myself that back then, but that's what we were. I became a natural entrepreneur. Like guys like me were always hustling, trying to figure out the thing.
Yeah.
And I sold a couple of businesses. By the time I was 30, I sold my first company. But I got fascinated with this question, which is, why is it that I'm doing better than my friends? Like that's where it started.
Sure.
Why do I have like a much more natural inclination towards money than my friends do? And then I enlarged that question to, why do some people who grow up in the middle class do better than other people? And then I looked at the question, and it really works out to roughly 1 out of 10. Roughly 1 out of 10 middle class people manage to accumulate some kind of wealth that puts them in, let's call it the top 10%.
Sure.
I mean, the top 1% is an interesting number, but kind of silly number. But the top 10% essentially means that you've accumulated something like high 7 figures of wealth all the way up to whatever. And I got fascinated with the question because it's really if you break the question down, Matthew, it's how is it that we all start out with life with the same resources, but some of us get different results?
Yeah. Yeah.
That was really my question. And it wasn't like I knew the answer and I wasn't trying to be a smartass about the answer. I just was so curious. Why is it that some of us take the same food ingredients and can make a much better meal than other people? How does that work?
Yeah.
And I started to do research in that area with someone who's very active in the wealth management world called Russ Allen Prince.
Yeah, I know Russ. Yeah, very smart guy. By the way, for our listeners, if you're not familiar with Russ's work, definitely check that out. He's, when it comes to taxes and wealth management, guys, next level.
Yeah, and he was so kind to me in terms of helping me do the research. And we both plowed into this question, which is a book called The Middle-Class Millionaire. And then ever since then, and some of the work you've seen of mine has been, how do these people operate? Let's just call them a kind of an oddball group. They do something a little different than everybody else. So what are they doing? And then also, what's it like to be inside their skin? What's going on inside of their brains that's a little different than everyone else?
Well, and then you also, through the birthing of giants, right? You're working with some of the most successful, like the 1%, the 1/2 of 1%. So I guess I just want to draw for our listeners, like you've got both real world experience of having gone from firmly middle class to have done very well for yourself. And then you're working across the spectrum. So this is what I really appreciate about your work, Lewis, is it's not theory. It's not like, here's what we think is going on. I mean, you're literally talking to these guys and gals on a regular basis.
I sold 2 businesses before 2010. Both media companies. I grew up in New York, so media is one of the things we do.
Yeah.
And then I was writing these books along the way. And then around 2010, I started a school. So I kind of describe it like this. I mean, who's LeBron James's coach? Probably a pretty good coach. And of course, he probably has a good coach because he wants to be the best damn player he can be. And so, of course, really, really successful people have coaches. And I had decided along the way, if I was going to be a coach, I would want to be a coach to the LeBron Jameses of wealth creation than to, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with like regular middle-class people who want to get out of debt. They want to save money for college. Good stuff. Sure. It's just that their identity was not as built around creating wealth as I was kind of interested in. And so this group of people called self-made wealthy, right? Like that group of people. And they're almost always, so self-made wealthy, really important, Matthew, is they did not inherit it.
Sure.
And they did not receive it in a settlement, i.e. divorce. They are wealthy from their own efforts. And so that's the group I became really passionate about. Digging in further, I got more passionate about them because it turns out they're the people who create jobs in America. Yeah. They're the people who, they basically pay their taxes like regular people. I mean, they're not Apple where they're starting like, shelters in Dublin or the Isle of Man or something. Like they're regular, you got a $10 million business. That's a great you should be very proud of yourself, but you don't have the best tax accountants in the world, like moving your money around in the Caymans. You're paying your taxes.
A lot of
You're
it, yeah.
sponsoring the local Little League. Yeah, you're paying a lot of taxes. You're hiring people. So I became obsessed with this very simple fact, which is that the middle-class millionaire is the job creator and is the spreader of economic impact globally. And then the kind of most recent thing I learned about 7 years ago was that poverty has diminished in lockstep with the spread of global capitalism. So you can thank capitalism, which has spread globally, obviously, over the past 200 years, with this very simple number. 200 years ago, 90% of the world lived in poverty. 200 years later, 9% of the world lives in poverty. Now, we have a long way to go. 9% is a big number. But capitalism did that. And so I became obsessed with this idea. Well, if I take really successful people and make them into even more successful people, we would be taking on poverty globally.
I love, by the way, that mindset right there. Like talk about like abundance on steroids, right? So like, hey, people that are really successful, let's help them be even better. It wasn't like, hey, who are people that are successful that I can collect a big fee from, or who's people that aren't going to notice, what I'm doing or just want to hang out, right? Like you're definitely trying to take this next level, right? Which speaks, I guess, for all of us as entrepreneurs, right? And Joe Polish from Genius Network talks about this. What's in it for them? Like, listen, if I can take someone to the next level, we're all going to win, and handsomely.
Yeah. And if you think about leverage, right?
Yeah.
I work with usually one person who, let's say, runs a company with 100 people and who may have 50 vendors globally. Each of them have 10 or 50 or 100 people working for them. And so where's the leverage? Well, that one person becomes the best source of leverage. If I can help that person make better decisions, it's going to affect hundreds or thousands of people. And that's what leverage became. So, one of the things I did for Birthing of Giants, this school I run, is I found the very best entrepreneurs in the world. I mean, these are the best people, and they all teach for free.
Wow.
Because they buy into the premise, which is we have about 25 people in a class. And if their businesses are on typically $25 or $50 million, if 5 years later they're $250 million, we have done a lot of good, a whole lot of good. So it's just all about leverage.
So, I mean, we're all on the same page here, right? Capitalism, despite its ills, right? Nothing's perfect, has basically eliminated poverty or has gotten us really darn close. A lot of these guys and gals came from middle-class backgrounds. They worked their tushes off. But it's got to be like if I just tell someone to work hard, like Lewis, if you come on, you're like, oh, well, Jarvis, what you need to do to the next level is just work harder. There's more to that recipe than that, right? I mean, a lot of people that are stuck in the middle class, they're grinding it out, right? Truck drivers and mechanics and whomever, but it's not in the way that's getting to the next level.
Well, if you just talk about hours in and of itself, it turns out the self-made wealthy actually work a lot more hours than anybody.
Yeah.
But if you even put that aside, it's the way they approach failure. It's the way they approach risk that's so different. So there is people call it the hero gene. Okay, it's kind of a cute name for it. But there's a gene, a piece of DNA encoding that exists in people who are law enforcement heroes. In other words, the people who run towards bullets, not away from them, right? And the normal person would run away from bullets, and nobody would blame them for that. But there's a small group of people who run towards them, and they have this heroic sense about themselves. With any luck, they're trained law enforcement personnel. They know what they're doing, but there's this group of people who run towards it. It turns out that hero gene exists in a lot of entrepreneurs where they run towards risk. The really normal thing to do is to run away from risk. So if I said to you, hey, let's start a business, it may or may not work, and we'll take 9 months to figure it out, but let's do it. There's a kind of person who says, I'm drawn to that idea.
Yeah, let's do it.
But the most normal person would say, well, that sounds like a horrible idea. I can get a job that pays me immediately. Why would I do that? So there is a correlation between people who take that risk and the ultimate reward, which is, if you did the right thing, took the right risk, good things happened, right? Then you probably made a lot of money.
Lewis, how does that tie? I remember in your presentation, you were sharing some statistics that people that are in those higher echelons, how they view failure, that sharing failure with friends. In fact, and I apologize, I don't remember that off the top of my mind, but it's sort of like the middle class never share their failures with anybody else. And these middle class millionaires and wealthy and ultra wealthy, they're like constantly sharing failures. Talk to us a little bit about like this mindset on failure. Is this tied to the hero gene? Is it its own thing?
Yeah, it's basically failure is where all the great learning comes from. I mean, if you talk to an entrepreneur who's experienced a lot of success, or let's say their last thing experienced success, they would tell you that they learned less in their successes than they had in the previous 5 failures, because failure is a much better teacher. But the challenge is, what if you're embarrassed about failure? Well, that's really awful for all of us. because you don't spread it around. You don't sit with your friends and say, I failed. Here's what I did wrong. Here's what I would have done differently. What would you have done in this situation? And then they'll say, well, when I was in that situation, I did this. And the instinct towards embarrassment or, let's say preserving your self-esteem in the face of failure is such a negative.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't help you and the half a dozen people around you. And then, networks work in even bigger sense. It doesn't help all of us kind of move forward. The group of people I spend time with, they sit around and talk about failure. I mean, one guy has a business card which says the hits on one side, and then they flip it over, it says the losses.
No way.
And he's listed every one of his failures and every one of his successes. And of course, the failures are longer list than the successes. And so it's really hard to do, especially in our social media world. I don't know if you have younger kids, but the picture that a teenager or a 20-something is getting is that, oh, look at Matthew. Look at that great car he just bought. Look at that beach vacation he's taken. He must have the best life ever. If I take a chance and I fail, all the Matthews in my world are going to think I'm a loser.
Yep.
Of course, we know that was the best day of your life when you bought that car, and it was the result of a year's worth of work. But that's not what comes across. Mm-hmm. Social media, what's coming across is so many of my network have the best lives ever. I can't take the chance at failing. I would say the biggest number one risk we have ahead of us, because entrepreneurship is a great word, but the word that's underneath entrepreneurship is innovation. Okay. You will never have somebody who invents a colonoscopy, which helps us live longer, if you don't have somebody who's kind of innovative and entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
So, entrepreneurship leads to longer lifespans. Entrepreneurship leads to better education. Entrepreneurship leads to higher quality of life. So if you've got young people saying, oh, I don't want to look like an idiot, you're going to lose out on entrepreneurship, which means you're going to lose out on innovation, which, by the way, means that if we're talking about American innovation, if we fall behind, we will get our clock cleaned by all the other countries who are doing better at this than we are.
There was an interesting article years ago. It was called Dude, Where's My Flying Car? And it looks into that quite a bit about like, hey, the reason we don't have flying cars isn't because the technology doesn't exist. It's just the innovation has been stifled from so many fronts. And not to beat on the anti-social media drum, but yes, I think for all of us as adults, but especially young people, right? All you see is that everyone has a perfect hair day. Everyone is always buying new cars. And then specifically for our audience, financial advisors, right? We go to conferences and we parade around the top producers and we parade around the biggest deals and all these things. And it's easy to sweep under the rug like, hey, they barely made it this far. Like they still remember all of that clawing along.
Yeah. And I think, and almost every entrepreneur will tell you it was the journey, not the destination. It really. And they'll tell you that, yeah, they may have a nice car and a nice this and nice that, but that's not the most important part of it all. It was the fact that they got to learn about their own confidence, about what sacrifice really means, about, the ways in which they can actually be a hero to their communities. Yeah. Very successful people just like I do. I mean, they do not dwell on the new car they bought after a while. It really becomes what impact are they having in their communities and things like that.
Lewis, something else you talked about in your presentation, and again, for our listeners, I look to see where Lewis is speaking next and go see the whole thing. But you talked about the importance of having 3 or 4 people in your life with whom you could share these failures. And that most of us are missing that. But talk a little bit more about, I mean, where did that come from? Obviously, it's from you seeing people that are very successful, but what's the significance of that? How do people develop that?
Yeah, so it's called nodal networking. Okay. I really do credit Russ Allen Prince for identifying this, but basically, it seems like very successful people typically have about 5 people that they're close to in a business context. And that those 5 people are, when I say they're close to them, it doesn't even mean that they like them necessarily. It's just that they see in that group of 5 people who can help them get ahead. Okay, so it could be like, you got the friend who's a great negotiator. So you check with him before you do any negotiating. You got the friend who's real savvy on PR, things like that. Yeah. So or if you're in the oil and gas field, you have the friend who's been in the oil and gas field for much longer than you. You construct a community of a small network. But the interesting number is the number 5, right? It's not 50 and it's not 1. It was so consistently 4.8. So it really what the number came out to be. But so consistently 5 individuals. What an interesting number.
Yeah.
And what a clearly operationalizable thing. Find 5 people and draw strong connections between you and them. So how do you draw a strong connection between you and them? Well, you give a lot before you ask, right? We're not, the funny thing about creating wealth is that people who haven't figured it out yet assume you have to have money to make money. It turns out you have to work hard. You have to be ready to embrace failure and learn from it, which is a real challenge to your self-esteem. Yes. you have to be able to reach out to 5 other people that you're going to help them on their journey while they help you on your journey, which means, as you were kind of alluding to, you have to share intimate things about your life with them. I don't mean personal intimate, but professional intimate. And which of those things take money? Nothing, right? Nothing. No. But it takes a lot of it takes a lot of leaning in.
Yeah, it really does.
And that's really the differentiator. You have, if you're going to be wealthy, it's just, this hopefully makes sense to anybody. There's only so much money to go around. So it's going to go to people who exhibit the behaviors and characteristics that most attract the money.
Yeah.
And so it turns out it's respecting adversity in the face of failure, working hard, learning what you're really, 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 really good at, and trying to do as much of that as possible and do as little of everything else. And then this issue about building a network of 5. And let me just talk about that one I just mentioned about. Here's the thing. If you are given a job by big employer X, you're going to probably fall into a job description where they're going to want you to do 12 different things. Yep. And that job description is in no way going to reflect what you're really, really good at. I mean, you may be good at some of them. Yeah, you may be good at 3 of them. But I mean, they need you to do all 12. And so the most successful people do, it's a 2-part sentence. They do as much as possible of what they're good at and as little as possible of what they're bad at. Like that's one of the huge secrets to success. And most places you work for a company where you just don't have that luxury. Whereas entrepreneurs can build the company around the thing they're best at and then surround them with 10 or 15 people who are good at the things they're all bad at.
It's always funny to me, Lewis, how many of these things come back to what we sort of dismiss as fundamentals, right? Like delegate, specialize, right? These things that are sort of just throwaway catchphrases, but you're seeing it show up again and again with your work and I always like to call that playing offense. Like there's a lot of things you can do and you might be pretty good at them. They're not moving the needle forward. They're not going to take you to that next level.
Right. Plenty of people around me who say I'm a really good connector. And I always say, you can make money as a connector. I mean, movie agents make money as a connector, but you really got to dive into the deep end of that pool because there's a lot of people who say they're good connectors. And turns out that they're pretty sharky about how they make money from being connectors. Yeah, if you really want to build the thing you're good at and do it hard, you're going to have to clear the other people out of the way and be the best at it. And yeah, you can see that when, LeBron James is the best at his thing, but that's such a hard skill, right? I mean, there's so few people who can do that. But in your little community, you could be really, really good at sales, negotiating, team building, strategy, predicting what's going to happen before it happens. And you can do that in your tiny town and probably do very, very, very well because of that.
Yeah, I mean, even look at Russ Allen Prince, who obviously you know very well, having co-written books. I've worked with him on some cases, right? He became very good at just that ultra high net worth, very complicated situation. And he's the guy. Like everybody knows that Russ Allen Prince is the guy to call when you have an ultra high net worth complicated thing. And if you call him with hey, I want to make $100,000 Roth conversion, he's like, that's not what I do. Like a lot, but there's a lot of money to be made there. He's just like, that's not what I do. And he's renowned for what he does, right? Same with your Birthing of Giants. When you go to your website for your school, it's very specific. This program is for these types of people. And if you're not that type of people, call us when you are. You could, I suppose, try to open a school that's for everybody. You could try to compete with Tony Robbins and everybody else that's doing the masses, but that's not where you went.
Yeah. No, Birthing of Giants is, a very serious kind of collection. I mean, we work really hard. It's a group, if you can imagine a room of people for whom failure is totally embraced, that even in the 5-day boot camp, you might fail 2 or 3 times and we just all shake it off and keep going. We just work our butts off for the week, but the end result is that you can totally see the path between where your $10 million company is and how to make it a $100 million company. It just comes as a result of you saying, Matthew, if you know something that could help me get to $100 million, please tell me. And if your answer is, well, you are lacking in this skill or this strength, you're going to tell me because that's the environment we create. And I'll say thank you when you do that because I'm trying to get to 100 million. I'm not trying to feel good.
What really stands out to me on that 5-day commitment, obviously these are guys and gals that are making a ton of money. Their per hour time is insane, and they're still willing to carve out an entire week. They probably haven't carved out a week for anything else in their world, right? Their vacations probably aren't even that long. So
That's true.
I always am, like you, a student of the game, fascinated that personal development is so important to them that they're willing to carve out an entire week to sit with a group of other entrepreneurs and talk about problems. They're probably drawn to it. They probably love it.
Yeah. It would be hard to sit through a week of our program with the way we go at it, that your business wouldn't be, let's just say millions of dollars bigger by the end of the week. I mean, maybe it could be hundreds of millions of dollars, but it certainly could be, it would be hard to not be millions of dollars bigger if you pay attention.
Yeah.
Show up.
Lewis, in our last couple of minutes, I want to pull just a little bit more on creating these nodal networks, right? How do people get started on that? You asked the group, and people are always hesitant to raise their hands, but who had a group of 3 or 4 people? And I think there was like 3 hands. Mine was one of them for the reasons you just mentioned. But again, some people aren't ever going to raise their hand, but it seems like it's rare in the general population. Like, any suggestions or patterns you've seen for establishing those? I mean, the idea of like, let me wait until someone calls me, that's probably not going to work.
For sure. Yeah. It's as simple as, it's just marketing like anything else. I mean, you need to go to 1 or 2 of those people, ask them out to lunch. First of all, if they won't go to lunch with you, that's good. Strike them off the list. Yeah. Like, in sales, quick no's are very helpful. Yep. And you'll get all the quick no's. And then you really can, I think you can say to somebody, hey, I'm going on this journey. I mean, you use your own words to say this, but I'm headed down this path. And I'm wondering if I could find a handful of people that I can, trust to go down the path with me. And I'm wondering if you want to have what I call, it's kind of an awkward phrase, business intimacy, because the word intimacy always feels weird to people. But basically, can you get out the words of, I'm looking for a business intimate relationship? So it starts with, I want to do things for you. I want to help you out. I want to be there for you. You tell me, you're trying to find 5 new clients this year. I'm going to try and find them for you. I'm going to tell me what those clients should look like. I will help you try to find them. And then hopefully you will, reflect that back at me. And of course it takes time. I mean, I'm in business now, near 30 plus years. I've got my group of 5, but I mean, and I'm super proud of the 5. They mean a lot to me. I would really bleed for them, but I mean, it took me years to find them.
Yeah, it's real work. I've got my group of 5 as well. In fact, while I was sitting in your presentation, I was texting them like, hey, listen, this guy Lewis, he's talking about this thing. I was like, really gratitude that we've got this. But you're right, it was a lot of reaching out. I mean, I would send people copies of this podcast, right? Or an equivalent one, like, hey, I heard this idea, business intimacy, sounds kind of weird. Maybe we should give it a try, right? Something that I found really helped is you've got to get, again, this intimacy, you got to open up the kimono as quick as you can, because like ours went from just guys hanging out to real serious when we all said, great, let's bring our P&Ls for our business and put them up on the screen and let's all go line by line. My CPA hasn't even seen my whole P&L, right? Like that gets real fast. And then you can help each other.
I think that's a wonderful practice. Yeah. And I think I'm just phrase everything you just said. It's hard to do, but you know what? Someone in your town is doing it in your field. Yep. So, it's hard to do, but either you do it or someone else is going to do it, or you can both do it. But yeah, there's nothing stopping you other than that's why the issue of creating wealth, it really comes down to how much you want it. And I don't mean some sort of weird, barracuda like television version of it. I just mean, are you willing to find out what you're bad at so that you can do more of what you're good at?
Yeah,
like
I love that.
That's a pretty basic threshold you have to be able to pass. And if your answer is, I'd rather people praise me than, give me critical feedback, you're probably not on the path to wealth. That's all. Yeah. And I teach undergraduates. I teach 20-year-olds, and we know that every student in the room is not necessarily destined to be an entrepreneur, and certainly a very small number to be successful entrepreneurs. But we say the wonderful thing about entrepreneurship, it's the greatest personal development program you've ever been through, because it's like a blowtorch. It just shears off everything about you that's not working. Yeah. Because it just requires that of you. And so, but whether it's the young people in our lives or whether it's the people who've decided that being in corporate America is the right path, like God bless all of it. Yeah. It's just that you're not going to be a wealth creator if you aren't willing to engage in this sustained kind of personal development program about who you are, what you're good at, what you're bad at, how hard you're willing to work, the chances you're willing to take. And every time I say this kind of stuff, Matthew, I get excited about it because, frankly, not to be too, serious, but there's only a few things worth doing in your lifetime, right? One is connecting with a handful of people that you go on the journey with. The other is learning about yourself, like just what your boundaries and borders are, what your capabilities and strengths are, and then having an impact on people that you may never meet, but you put good energy into the world. Yeah. None of that is about having a nice car or being rich. None of that is what matters. I just think entrepreneurship is the best way to be in the world where you have a good time with good people and learn good stuff. Yeah, it's amazing. Lewis, this was pure gold, man. Thank you so much for being here on the show. How can people learn more about your work? Of course, they can go on Amazon and buy your books. How else can they track you down? Yeah, well, come to Birthing of Giants, birthingofgiants.com. And I didn't mention this, but I have a wonderful program at Oxford University every August called Moonshots and Moneymakers. Yeah, it's super fun. And so basically imagine going to Oxford for a week with a bunch of other North American, business leaders. And we are learning how to turn our money makers, our good businesses, into moonshots, crazy scale businesses.
Wow.
And it's always going to be through the introduction of technology in the widest sense of the world. And so, yeah, it's a really fun week. I mean, it's like someone called it Hogwarts for entrepreneurs. It's got kind of a Walt Disney feeling because Oxford is this 1,000-year-old medieval city. Yeah. So, yeah, I would just encourage your listeners to check out Moonshots and Moneymakers for an incredible week in Oxford. So much fun.
I love it. Lewis, again, thank you so much for being here. And to all of our listeners, until next time, happy planning.